So what if there was a really simple way, only 4 things, 4 basic assumptions, that when we really deeply explore them, just 4 thoughts. It's going to be one of those days. Just 4 thoughts to examine. That's really hard to say. Then when we actually examine them, we can come to a deep experiential understanding that everything in the universe is absolutely quiet, silent, harmless, benign. The universe is friendly. It's only been reflecting back my own inner self-criticism and self-rejection back to me. And everything I've been experiencing has really been about that. So we're going to look at these 4 things that we want to look at until we can prove they're absolutely true. So this is the fastest track to full and final awakening that I could possibly tell you to follow. Some of you may not like this kind of very extraordinarily direct way. And if you don't, it's okay. There are 2.5 years nearly now of archives of graduate program lessons. You can study anyone. You don't have to study whatever we're learning in this particular month. Probably though, you're all a bit bonkers like me and want the fastest route out of trouble immediately. So this is for those that are a little bit obsessive like I am. So we're going to want to prove 4 facts. They are true nonetheless, but we tend to doubt those. So the first fact is, and some of them will be easier than others. Again, this is on the lesson plan, so don't worry about writing it down unless you want to. First fact is that you do exist. And I think most of us wouldn't argue with that first one. You know, experientially right now, do you exist? You can check that out and go, yes. And what I exist as, you know, who knows, but I'm seeing clearer and clearer what I exist as. But right now, can we say experientially that you do exist? And if you tell me that you don't exist, you know, you have to actually be here too. You have to show up and exist to tell me that you don't, to use the body. So the second one, so we don't need to spend too much time on number 1. The second one is, I do not exist somewhere as a someone, as a separate being. I've tried to find a separate being and I cannot find it. So as I'm reading these out, I'm going to read it again in a minute, feeling out which one you're not entirely sure of. For most of us, it will be 2, 3, and 4. So just feeling in your body. I kind of get that, but I'm not totally convinced of that. I've seen a few times, but I can't find a someone. I do not exist somewhere. I do exist, but I don't exist somewhere in, if this is the whole universe, I don't exist somewhere in that universe as a someone. Most I can say is there's a body present, but I can't find a someone. I've tried to find a separate being and I can't find it. This is what we're doing in lesson 3. And then the third one, and again, you might have even more doubt about this one. Do you remember we spoke about this believer meter? Your body's telling you how convinced you are of something. You can feel, yeah, that feels really true. That one, not so much. That one, it feels just kind of theoretical. So you're not convinced of these yet, and that's okay. That's why we're bringing this up now. Number 3 is, if I do exist and I'm not existing somewhere, then the only other option is that I must be everywhere. I cannot be absent, so non-existence is not possible. Right now, you know you exist. Non-existence is not an option right now, isn't it? Don't let people say, yeah, but after death. Let's not worry about that. Let's just prove right now in this moment you do exist. So non-existence is not an option for you. You do exist because I know I am here. If I'm not an object, then I must be pure subjectivity or awareness. So I'll read that one again. Number 3, if I do exist and I'm not existing somewhere, we just proved that in lesson 3. The only other option is that I must be everywhere. So if I'm in the if I think I'm in the universe as a someone, like here's the universe and here's planet Earth, this tiny little thing. Obviously, it's not to scale. My hands aren't big enough to stretch. So here's planet Earth, and we think we're someone on planet Earth. But if we can't find that separate being when we actually look, but we are here, we do exist, but not as a someone, the only other option must be that you're everywhere. And then last but not least, number 4, if I exist everywhere, then there is nothing else than me. Everywhere, all the time, everything I'm encountering is myself, the self. I am all forms and the formless too. All names and nouns are my names. So that is pretty much the fastest track. And I set about proving these to myself. Lesson 3 was me proving number 2, I do not exist as a someone. Lesson 4 was number 3 and number 4. This is where these came from. So that might seem like a tall order. How on earth do I set about experientially proving to myself that I'm everywhere? How do I get as convinced as the sages are of those 4 facts? So first thing is that it's already happening. You don't need to actually make it happen. I'm just distilling down the process that you, the self, the noumenon, is going through in your understanding. First, you thought you existed as a someone. Secondly, you're realizing I don't actually exist as a someone. But then what happens is we tend to listen to the mind. The mind starts back up again. Right after we have this seeing in lesson 3, I can't find as someone. We even have people saying in lesson 3 in January that they must be everywhere. Experientially, they were seeing, I don't have any edges. I go on forever in all directions. Upwards, downwards, forward, backwards, back through time, forwards into the future. 1 million years from now, I'll still be here exactly the same. 1,000 years ago, exactly the same. And all those great sages that I've been revering are my very own self. We can have that seeing, however deep that's gone. And then the very next thing that happens is mind starts back up talking again. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you notice when mind starts talking again, it's talking as if you were someone somewhere. Have you noticed that? So you have this beautiful seeing, I don't exist as someone somewhere. The very next thing mind says is, how do I keep that then? How do I keep that? How do I stop falling back into illusion? And that's a problem for someone somewhere, isn't it? That's not a problem for the noumenon that's everywhere. It can't fall back into illusion. Or mind will start to talk about somebody else or something else. Whatever thought pops up, even if mind starts to think about the noumenon, the everywhereness, it's still doing it from one body mind only, isn't it? If I have a thought, I am everywhere, that thought is happening in this brain only here, and not in those brains that I'm looking at, those body-mind vehicles. So what happens is we let the thoughts override what we've just seen to be true. Any attention that we give to thought, we're going to be doing that as a separate someone, going back into someoneness, that separate being, that egoic sense of self. So just noticing here, we're going to prove to ourselves in the homework for this month then, going to work on proving these 4 things. Firstly, you do exist. Secondly, that you don't exist as a someone, can't find that. So you can do the exercises for lesson 3 in that. And then noticing that if you can't find a someone in the universe, the only other option is you must be the universe. There is no other way to exist. There's only 3 options for existence. One is as a separate being, and we've proved that that's not true. And again, if you're not convinced enough of that, that's okay. It's just more opportunity. The second is to not exist, and we know that's not the case. And the third is to exist as the everythingness. Now, our mind is never going to make that jump. You're going to have to give it a shove. You're going to have to keep coming away from thoughts that are of and for a someone. How do I make sure I keep this after I've seen it? Is that a thought of the everywhereness or the someoneness? What do I do next time a karmic pattern comes up? Is that the everywhereness's business, or is that a someone? So if you look at every thought you've had today, if you can just spend 30 seconds thinking about, not all of them, of course, because I can't remember them, but most of the thoughts you've had today, whatever you can remember, look at those and see if they apply to the everywhereness. Are you thinking as the everywhereness, or are you thinking as a someone? And it's, of course, it's a trick question, because there's nothing really to think about as the everywhereness. What would you think about? Who would you think about? This is the omnipresence and the omniscience right here. When you know what you are, you know what everything is, because you are everywhere. Or when you know, like in lesson 4, what that table there really is, what it actually really is, deep down, it's stillness, then you know what everything is, because the table is also omnipresent. It's not a table, it is a formless substance which is everywhere. So whether you're going through lesson 3 or lesson 4, you end up at the same essential understanding. There's only one being, and it's everywhere at all times, and there's nothing other than it. It's never managed to divide itself, actually. It's never managed to even divide itself into formless and form. So if you can, and again, some of you might not like this directness, but if you can stay at this point where you compare, you look at the thought that comes up and you ask, is this a thought of a someone? Does this apply to someone? Or is it a thought of the everywhereness? And every time I did this, I came back to this understanding that no thoughts at all apply to the noumenon, to the awareness. You can think about it, but that doesn't really get anywhere close, does it? You can't really ever fully know it, as we were talking about curiosity and openness and not knowing. And so these 4 facts is to look at these 4 facts until, feeling them out as I'm saying them. I'll read them again in a minute. And again, they're on the lesson plan, just to see which ones you're not fully convinced of. The first one, as I'm talking about, you're not fully convinced of, then that's where to put your attention. Because over and over again, it could take someone into a seeing and self-inquiry that they can't find themselves as a someone. And 5 minutes later, and this is no judgment of anyone, I did the exact same thing, maybe even 30 seconds later for me, I was back to thinking of myself as a someone. That's great. I've just seen I can't find myself at all as a separate being. I don't know where I am, or I'm everywhere. I am the silence. I'm looking at the ego, not from it. The very next thing that happened then is 30 seconds later, I'm identifying as a someone again. I'm listening to what the mind was telling me. Why do we listen to mind? Because we feel it's talking to us, right? If you knew with absolute conviction that you were everywhere, what could mind say in any one particular brain that would have any impact on you? And that's not that we push away thoughts, they're just obviously not relevant to the everywhereness. So again, I'm not anti-mind or thinking. Thinking is a helpful process many, many times, but if you look at the percentage of your thoughts each day that are actually to do with a someone, and how quickly, all I need you to see is how quickly our allegiance goes back to the mind, because the mind is talking as a someone. It's giving you information, trying to give you helpful information. It thinks, based on what mind thinks is true, that you're a someone somewhere. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to read these again, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, sharings. And if one of these, when I'm reading them, if you're feeling inside your body's there to help give you feedback on how convinced of this you are or not. And you can feel when something feels true, right? Something feels true, you know it. If it doesn't feel true, you also know it. There's nothing wrong with doubt or a lack of conviction about something. That's exactly why we're here, to come to a deeper conviction. So as I'm reading these out, if there's one that you want help to prove, we'll talk about it experientially, then I'd ask you to put your hand up, and really we'll work through these together. We'll see how many we can get through. We'll take a short break, and then we'll go through some general questions. If you have general questions, see how many people put their hand up here. So the first fact, again, just listening as I'm saying these, seeing which ones you're not utterly convinced of. And of course, pretty much everyone is not going to be convinced of 3 and 4, and possibly 2, depending on how new you are to the teachings. It's okay. I've even met some people that weren't convinced about number 1, so that's okay too. Had an interesting conversation about that. So number 1 is, I do exist. Number 2 is, I do not exist somewhere. Let me start that one. I do not exist somewhere as a someone, as a separate being. I tried to find that separate being and I cannot find it. Number 3, if I do exist and I'm not existing somewhere, then the only other option is that I must be everywhere. And number 4 is, if I exist everywhere, then all there is me. So let me just summarize them for sake of which ones you need help with. Number 1, I do exist. Fact. Number 2, I'm not a separate being. Fact. Number 3, I must exist everywhere, simultaneously at all times. And number 4, I must be everything. There's nothing other than me. Everything I think I see is me. Or everything I see and experience is the self, or Krishna, or whatever you want to call it, awareness, consciousness. There are no things. It doesn't matter really what you call this yourself. It doesn't matter in that way. So